Hi, I'm John deSteiguer, the president of Oklahoma Christian University. We've had a series of unbelievable speakers the last few years as a part of our History Speaks program. Just some of the greatest civil rights leaders and icons that our country has ever seen. We've had two of the Little Rock Nine, Carlotta Walls Lanier, we've had Dr. Terrence Roberts, Fred Gray, and Claudette Colvin. The next year we had John Carlos and Tommy Smith, the great Olympians. We've had Diane Nash, we had Wheeler Parker Jr. last year, and this year it's unbelievable. We're honored to have Ambassador Andrew Young with us here at Oklahoma Christian University. Thanks for being here.
I've been following those people all my life.
They are some great people.
Yeah, they are. Mm-hmm.
Well, I first want to ask a question. You went to a small college, Mr. Ambassador, instead of going to a big college or a big university.
Nobody else would let me in.
Well, I'm very favorably disposed towards small colleges. Was that a good decision for you?
It was an extremely good decision. In fact, it was a college very much in this tradition. I really do believe that the strength and health of the United States of America grew out of those small colleges that were founded by churches really just after the Civil War. There was a missionary movement about the 1840s, and about 150 years ago, these smaller colleges, and they really were small, but they changed the world. And I've found them not only in the United States and changing the South or the North, but the college that Nelson Mandela went to is 168 years old. And it was founded by some of the same missionaries that eventually came to Atlanta and founded, say, Morehouse College 150 years ago.
Right?
There are colleges in India, in Zimbabwe, in fact, I visited a small college in England that I had visited with Martin Luther King 50 years ago. And they had an anti-slavery rally in 1790.
Oh, wow. That's
remarkable. In the beginning of the anti-slavery movement. So you almost have to see you can't see the college as a college. You have to see these colleges as a network of spiritual education. And I would say almost anywhere I've been, the true leaders have come through these little missionary colleges. I was with President Carter in Nigeria, and he's a Baptist, and the president of Nigeria was a Baptist, so we had them in church together, and President Carter read the Old Testament scripture, and he said, I first heard about Nigeria when I was 12 years old, and we had a car wash in Plains, Georgia, to buy books to send to a little Baptist missionary training school. And when the president of Nigeria got up, he said, Mr. President, I want to thank you. He said, I was a barefoot boy that walked 3 miles every day to get to that little training school, and that's where I learned how to read and write. But he didn't say, but what he also did was, he also ended up the top engineering student in the United Kingdom engineering courses for their kingdom. And So to have two people, one president of the United States, and Obasanjo at that time was probably one of the most respected people in Africa. In fact, he was the one that probably did more to get, he and Carter did more to get Nelson Mandela out of jail than anybody else. I encourage people nowadays to think about their education dollar because education is too expensive, and you need to be sure of what you're getting. And I got 9 grandchildren, and they all want to pick the most expensive colleges.
If you'll give me their addresses, I'll write to them about this. We're not the most expensive, so.
No. But they want to go to big name places
sure.
where they never get to know anybody. I went to Dillard University first in New Orleans, and I would dare say that I knew by name almost half the people on the campus.
That's one of the beauties of small colleges,
it is.
and that's a beauty of this university as well. Mr. Ambassador, I want to ask you a little bit about some of your efforts in the 60s and 70s during the civil rights movement. I've read Walk in My Shoes. I really enjoyed the interchange that you had in that book. But you said in that book that you had never really fully planned out your role in the civil rights movement. It just kind of happened. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I wasn't a good student. And I wasn't a good student because my daddy wanted me to be a dentist. And I worked in dental laboratories every summer, and I was sick and tired of being a dentist. I just barely got out. I mean, I graduated, oh, thank you, Lordy. And coming back from North Carolina, I ran to the top of a mountain and I said, I don't know what my life is about, but I've wasted up to now. And I looked around and everything seemed to have a purpose. And I said, if the trees have purpose, and the cornfields have purpose, and the sunflowers have purpose, cotton fields, then there's got to be a purpose for me. And I don't know what it is, and I don't care, but God would not have made this world without a purpose for me too. And I said, I'll just do the best I can a day at a time, and whatever happens will happen. And there's absolutely no way I could have planned anything that happened to me. And it hasn't all been considered good by most people. But it all turned out to be better than anybody thought it was. I mean, I've had, it's either a blessed or cursed career, depending on how you want to look at it.
I think we all view it as a very blessed career.
Well, I do too.
What were some of the highs? What were some of the highest points and some of the lowest points in your active work in the civil rights movement back in the 60s?
You know, I went to a little church in South Georgia, 2 churches. I had 30 members in one church and 15 in the other. And I ran my first voter registration drive. And the day before we started the drive, this was 1956, came around a curve going back to my home, and there were about 200 Klansmen out on the road. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what they were there to, whether they didn't want me to run a voter registration drive or what. But I was married to a little country girl from Alabama who was a devout Christian. And I said to her, look, if the Klan comes here, I'm going to talk to them. But I want you to sit in the window with the rifle. And then I can talk from a position of strength. If he knows something happens to him, something happens to him, if something happens to me. She said, I can't do that. I said, but you're a good shot. She said, yeah, I can shoot birds and I can shoot skeets, but I can't point a gun at a human being. I said, that's the Ku Klux Klan. What are you talking about? She said, yeah, and you're a preacher. I said, what's that got to do with it? And she said, if you ever forget that under that sheet is the heart of a child of God, you don't need to be preaching.
Wow.
And that was probably the first test. But she pushed me to think and work. And what I did changed my life, because without being able to do anything violent, I had to think. And I realized the mayor of that little town ran the hardware store. And I'd go in there and buy stuff because we were having to build our parsonage. So I knew him pretty well, so I went to see him. And I told him what was going on, and he got the Sunnyland Packing Company and Flowers Bakery were the two largest employers. He got them on the telephone, and they agreed that the Klan could have its meeting on the courthouse steps, but it couldn't march in the black community, and that we could have our voter registration drive with no trouble. And what that taught me was that you can reason with people about almost anything. And so my going to see the mayor in Thomasville in 1956, then when I went to Birmingham with Dr. King, he said, don't you know any of these business people here? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, see who you can find out who you can meet. I said, well, I know the Episcopal preacher here, and in fact, he had just become bishop. And he said, well, go start talking to him. And so in talking to him, before any demonstration started, we started meeting with the businessmen and women of Birmingham. And in spite of all of the dogs and the fire hoses and the bombings and things, we almost never missed a day coming together to see what we could do to move a step further. And in 90 days, 100 businessmen had signed an agreement desegregating all of the public facilities in Birmingham, even though it was against the Alabama law.
And that proves up, and one of the things you talked about in that book, Walk in My Shoes, was that business can move more decisively and more quickly than government can.
Well, when President Carter asked me to go to the UN, the first people I went to see in South Africa were the business community.
Hey, that reminds me, I want to ask, you've served as the ambassador to the United Nations on behalf of the United States, you've been a congressman, you've served as the mayor of a major metropolitan area, Atlanta. How would you compare and contrast the leadership or the struggles or challenges you had in those 3 different arenas?
They were all, I liked mayor better because I was the boss, and if I made a mistake, it was my stupidity. If I made a mistake at the State Department, they blamed the Secretary of State or tried to blame the president, and I didn't like that. Congress was fun, except Congress is so big. Well, 500 people have to get a consensus to change things. And so Congress is slow. But you can decide to do something that people think is crazy as a mayor, and you can get it done the next day.
Wow.
I mean, I knew in Atlanta that, one, I'd start talking with a newspaper editor, and I'd start talking, then I'd go to see the largest television station and see one of the banks, and by the time I talked to 4 people, I got a sense of what could be done.
Wow.
But
Wow,
but you could do it personally, and if the guy thought you were crazy, he'd tell you.
So you had that immediate feedback as
that's
well.
right. Mm-hmm.
Hey, let me ask you one final question. If you had a bit of advice for college students today, what would that advice be?
Do not plan a thing. God has a better plan for you than you can ever dream of. Look in as to what God has put in you, and don't worry about what your grades are or how much money you're making. None of that. It helps if you find a woman who halfway agrees with that kind of spiritual approach to life.
It's such an honor to have you here on this campus,
Which I did.
You had 2, I believe.
Yeah.
I've read about your first wife and what a special woman she was, and I know you're married to a wonderful woman now as well.
Both school teachers.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, boy,
both 5th grade.
they both taught 5th grade.
Yeah. Which is about my mental level.
I think not. But Ambassador Andrew Young, what a great man, and what a great honor for us to have on campus. And don't worry about all of your plans. God has a plan for you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.